This month's podcasts are sponsored by Aubergine Legal. Do you sometimes worry that your business isn't meeting all its legal compliance requirements and wonder if you're ticking all the legal boxes? Are you losing sleep worrying about a piece of legislation that you may or may not be complying with? Perhaps you need some help with your client contracts or your data protection compliance. Or maybe you're worried that your website doesn't have the right documents or legal notices in the right place. Perhaps you have a brand that you want to protect with a trademark. How about if you could outsource it all and eliminate all of your worries? If so, then get in touch with Aubergine Legal, a friendly commercial legal consultancy offering practical and clear commercial legal advice without the overwhelming legal jargon, taking the worry away and helping you to protect your business and minimise your risks. Aubergine offers a free 30-minute consultation if you have any questions or want to find out if they can help, and you can access this link and book your free 30-minute call via the link in the show notes.
Welcome to the Bring Your Product Ideas to Life podcast. Practical advice and inspiration to help you create and sell your own physical products. Here's your host, Vicki Weinberg.
Hi, whenever you're listening to this, I hope you've had a wonderful week. So this is another solo episode, just me today, and I want to talk about creating a product to sell. When I created my very first product, which was about 6 years ago now, I wasted so much time. I'll be honest, I had no idea what I was doing. I had no plan to follow. I went down loads of rabbit holes, spent way too much time on YouTube, and I also wasted a lot of money as well. And that's not even to mention all of the missed sales during the 8 or 9 months it took me to get my product live, because of course the sooner you can get your product ready to sell, the sooner you can start making some money back. So for subsequent products, because you may know I had a brand of baby products, so that was my first product, which was bamboo baby swaddles that took ages and ages to get live. But for subsequent products, I had a process. I knew what steps I needed to take, I knew which order to take them in, and I even created myself a checklist in Trello to work through. And subsequent products, I was launching somewhere between, 6 and 8 weeks, depending on the product, and that's not including obviously the production time. But in terms of going from this is a product I want to add to the range to having it sort of ready to go, that was a timescale I was looking at, which was obviously significantly cheaper and quicker, I should say. And that it really is all about just knowing what to do, when to do it, and the steps to take. And so that's why I wanted to share this episode with you, which is how you can create a product in just 10 weeks. And if you're listening in live time, that means by the end of 2022, the end of this year. And the reason I'm recording this episode now is a few reasons. One, because if you do it now, it is doable to do it by the end of the year. In case you're wondering why 10 weeks when I've just told you that I've done it myself in 6 or 8, I'm kind of going for the worst case scenario. Maybe not even worst case, but I'm trying to build in time for you to take things at your own pace, knowing that you might have busy weeks where you don't have a lot of time to get anything done. Obviously, conversely, you might have weeks where you got a bit more free time and you're able to get more done. But I wanted it to be achievable and manageable. And best of all, once you know the steps involved in creating a product to sell, you can repeat this process time and time again anytime you want to add a new product to your range. And as I say, it will get quicker and it will get easier, because you'll be more confident, you'll know what you're doing, and you'll have proven to work before. Before I go any further, I just want to tell you about a new free download I have for you. It is a how to create a product in 10 weeks planner that goes through everything you need to do each week, step by step, and it's got little boxes for you to tick off your progress. So it ties in really nicely with this episode. And you can get that by going to checklist.vickiweinberg.com/planner. So that's checklist.vickiweinberg.com/planner. And of course, that'll be linked in the show notes as well. So let's get going. And of course, because I'm doing this in order, I'm going to start with week 1. So week 1 is about getting clear on your product idea. The very first thing you want to do is define what your product is and who your product's for. And I want you to really take some time to think about this. So what is your product? And rather than just saying, well, it's a towel. Okay, well, what sort of towel? What problem does it solve? Who might buy a product like this? Who's it for? Is it for children, but you're expecting parents to buy it? Is it a towel for swimmers? Is it aimed at a different demographic? Have a real think about what your product is. What's it made of? What makes your towel different? Are you making a towel that you can change underneath for people who do open water swimming? Are you making a hands-free towel for mums with small babies? Have a think through all of this and jot down all of your initial thoughts about your product, whether that's how or what it's made of, how it works, how it's packaged. And don't worry if you don't know the answers to everything now as well. So if you know, okay, I want to create a towel for parents with new babies and I want it to be sort of hands-free in some way, but I don't know quite how I do it, that's fine. Just make a note of everything that you know right now. And as we go through the process, we're going to start to refine it. Also think about what's your USP or unique selling point. This can and probably will change when you start to do some research in later weeks, but it's always good to get your initial ideas onto paper. Also think about why you want to create and sell this particular product. Maybe this is your USP. Maybe you've been in a situation where there was something you desperately needed, it wasn't available and you've decided to create it. And knowing what your USP is might also come in useful further down the line when you start to talk about your product. So for example, in your marketing, your social media posts, maybe if you get any press. So definitely worth taking the time to think this through. You also need to be thinking about your customer. So who is your customer? What problems or concerns do they have? How would your product help them? And a final very useful thing to think about is where your ideal customer shops. So for example, do they shop online? Do they shop in person? Do they shop via social media? Are they likely to buy things on Instagram posts? Or do they shop on other online marketplaces, for example, Etsy? Knowing this will also help you decide where to sell your product further down the line. But I should just say, if you don't know this now, do not worry, because this is something you can ask. Once next week we're going to talk about validating your product idea, actually talking to potential customers. So if you don't know where they shop, make a note and we can ask people that when we get to it. So that's week 1. In a nutshell, it's about getting everything down out of your head onto paper, all of your initial ideas for your product as a starting point. Week 2 is about validating your product idea, and I'm going to pre-warn you that this is a big week. I think we went in for hopefully fairly easy with week 1. That's something you could probably do in half an hour to an hour if you've got a bit of quiet time. But week 2, there's quite a lot to do. So there's 2 stages to validating your idea. The first one is customer research. Knowing who your customer is key, which is why we spend time on that during week 1. It helps you to ensure that you're creating the product your customers want, the product they need, and it also makes it easier to be sure you're speaking to the right people this week when we're starting to validate your idea. I should say that I've spoken about validating your product ideas a lot. I have a free guide with lots of free ideas, and I have a whole podcast episode on this topic. So if validating your product idea is something you want to know more about, there is more information available. If you can't find it, drop me an email and I can send you over the links. But there will be links in the show notes as usual as well. So what we don't want you to do here is just ask your family and friends for input. So you've got a great idea for a product, and of course I'm not saying don't share it with people, but your friends and your family might not be your ideal customer, and asking them can be tricky because you might find that actually they say what they think you want to hear. Yes, that's a great idea. Go ahead. That sounds like a wonderful product. And actually they don't know because they're not the person that would buy it or use it. Or you might find that they go the opposite way and they're a little bit cautious and they put you off and they say, is that really a good idea? Would somebody really buy that? So I'm not saying don't listen to their opinions. And I'm certainly not saying don't talk to them about it. But I am saying unless your family or friends, and this possibly won't apply to all of them, you might just have a few family members or a few friends who are your ideal customers. If they're not the person who ultimately your product is targeted at, you have to take it with a pinch of salt. To give an example from real life, when I was trying to validate some of my ideas for my brand of baby products, I had one friend who, and I should say I wasn't asking for her thoughts, but I was telling her about my products and what I was planning. And she was saying, I don't know if people will buy that. And I thought, that seems a bit expensive. And this person I was talking to wasn't a parent. And I'm not saying that means her opinion wasn't valid, but she definitely wasn't the person that I was targeting at that time. And yeah, of course, I still was quite hurt by the feedback. Of course I was, because this was my business and my brand, and you only want to hear nice things. But I did have to sort of have a little chat with myself and say, okay, she isn't someone who's likely to buy this anyway, which doesn't mean her opinion isn't valid, but for the purpose of my research, I need to talk to people who, potentially might buy my products in future. So maybe some potential customers for your products personally. If so, great. If not, go and find them. You might be able to find them in Facebook groups or other online or offline groups. And once you do find them, you need to ask them some questions. So you want to ask things like, have they ever bought a product similar to yours? And if so, what they thought of it. If they have never bought anything similar to your product idea, you could ask them whether they'd consider buying it, what reason they'd be buying it for, and what they'd expect to pay. One of my favourite questions to ask is, if you were buying an X, whatever it might be, what would it need to do or be to exceed or even maybe meet their expectations? And you can do all of this without giving away too much, because I know that you might not be comfortable sharing all of your product plans and ideas just yet. You don't need to go out there and say, I'm going to sell and whatever it is, what do you think? You can ask all these questions hypothetically and just gather a bit of research. And as I say, a lot of this you can do online as well. So if you don't need to be setting up focus groups, you don't need to be walking into a room and speaking to people if that's not your thing. You can perhaps find Facebook groups with, as I say, if your product was aimed at swimmers, maybe you can find some Facebook groups with that demographic, and maybe check with the admin if you're not sure. But I can't see anyone would object to you going in and saying, I'm just wondering if anyone has bought a whatever it is, and can I ask a few questions? So the second phase of validating your idea is to carry out some market and competitor research. And by this I mean look at other products. This is really easy to do online again. You don't have to, this is time consuming, but you don't have to do it in one go. This is something you can definitely do in little chunks. But the key thing here is to keep notes and be meticulous on this. I like looking at Amazon to do my competitor research, and even if you never intend to sell there, because I know you might not, you can really learn a lot, because there's a whole range of products on Amazon and a lot of them have reviews. For some reason it seems to be a marketplace where people really do leave reviews. If you're listening to this and you sell there, you might be going, really? But it is hard to get reviews. However, for whatever reason, you do tend to get more there than you would somewhere else. If your products are handmade, then Etsy would be a good place to look. And what you're going to be doing is search for products similar to yours, and it might be that your product's completely unique, but there's likely to be something comparable or kind of similar, and you're going to be looking at those products' features, how much they're selling for. You can look at their photos, and importantly, you're going to take the time to read the reviews, because they will tell you a lot. If you're short on time, because depending what kind of niche you're going into, that there might be lots of similar products on the market already, just read the 1-star and 5-star reviews, because then you get to find out why people really dislike the product and why they really like it. And as I said, make sure you do keep notes. So when I do this, I have a spreadsheet. I write down the name of the product, I include a link to it, I write down what the price is, and I have a column for what people like, what people dislike, and the features as well. And this will really help you design and refine your own product. So this week is all about data gathering. When we get to week 3, you're going to write your product specification. So you're going to use what you found out during the last 2 weeks to make your product the best it can be and write up a detailed specification. And at the moment, this is just for your use. While you're doing this, I think there are 2 questions that you can give some thought here. One is, how can my product meet my customers' needs? Because you've spoken to your customer, hopefully you've got an idea of what they're looking for. And the second question is, how can I improve on the products already on the market? Because remember, now you know what other products are already out there, you know what people think of them. How can you make yours better? So coming back to my towel example from earlier, maybe you've been looking at similar towels and everyone said, oh, they're a bit scratchy, or they're a bit small, or I wish they were brighter colours, or maybe I wish they were more camouflaged, or whatever it is. You can see what people are actually asking for and create a product that meets that need. Also, even if you're making products yourself, I still believe a product specification is helpful, because you may still have to source ingredients or components. So if you make candles, you might need jars, for example, and it's always good to have something to refer back to. Of course, if you're making something really creative like art or jewellery or photography, then perhaps you work intuitively and you can skip this step. I'm going to leave that to you to judge. But if you're creating a product that you intend someone else to make for you, you really need to do this. So this is about taking your initial ideas, everything you've learned, really taking some time to think it through and getting something down on paper. I also think that this week is a great time to make a decision on price. I've spoken about this before, but I'm going to talk about it again. I'll try and keep it brief. I like to think about what I might sell my product for at this stage for a few reasons. Main one being, in my opinion, I'm most likely to get it right because I've just been looking at the market, so I know what other products are around and I know what they're selling for. I know how my product compares against theirs because I've just done my specification. So I know, okay, all my competitors are charging this, but actually mine's a bit bigger, so perhaps I can charge a bit more. And I've also asked my ideal customers for their opinions about what would you expect to pay for this, and what do you want from the product. I think this is a really great time to think about what your selling price will be. Because the danger of pricing your product later is that you're basing your price on the production price, or maybe your time if you're making your product, with the aim of making a profit, which means that the price you choose might not be viable. If you price your products this way round, when you start to get the price for it to be made, you can see if a profit is possible right away based on the price you've already decided you're selling it for. And if not, if you start getting prices back and you realise actually this product is not going to be profitable, then you can do something about it. So you can look at other suppliers, maybe look at sourcing other countries, maybe you can tweak your specification. But the one thing I don't think you want to do is to say, okay, well, I can't make a profit unless I sell my product for X amount and then price it so high that nobody buys it. Because remember, people actually, for you to make a profit, you have to make sales. And if you're pricing your product just to make a profit without thinking about where it fits in the marketplace, then that's a harder sell. So a little word of caution. I do have a whole podcast episode on this, which I will of course link to in the show notes, where you can hear me, basically saying what I'm saying now, but in a bit more detail. But yeah, bottom line is think about the price now. I think it's a great time to do it because you've just done all this research. Really good time. So moving on to week 4, this week you're going to prepare your supplier communication. Now, you did most of this work last week when you finalised your product specification. So this week is a really good time to put it into an email template you can send to potential suppliers. So I recommend writing a standard email that you're going to send to every supplier that you contact via email. Because even if you are looking at suppliers in the UK and you think, well, I can just phone them up, most of the time they'll say to you, oh, actually, can you send that over on an email? It just saves them writing everything down. Also, if it's in an email, there's no ambiguity. No one can say, oh, you didn't tell me this, or I wasn't aware of that, because it's in writing. What you want to include in this is everything a supplier would need to be able to quote for your product correctly and accurately without giving everything away. So at this early stage, I think that you might not want to be sharing designs or blueprints or whatever your products consist of. You basically just want to be given enough information that you can get a quote. So that might be, I don't know, there might be a fine line, but I think you will know. And if you don't know, of course, you can get in touch and ask for help. You might want to think this week about whether you need a patent or any other protection as well, if you haven't thought about that already, because I think when you're starting to think about how much you're willing to share with suppliers, that might throw things up where you go, oh, actually, maybe I should see if I need some sort of protection before I start speaking to anybody. So what I suggest including are the key requirements for your product. So that's everything that's fixed and you won't be swayed on. And then asking the supplier in turn your sort of deal breaker questions. So these might include things like, do they handle the packaging in-house? Because maybe you need to find a supplier who can do packaging for you. You might want to ask about their current lead times, because it might be that if they can't work to a certain schedule, then that doesn't work for you. If you do ask this, it's also worth asking whether there are times of year when this significantly changes, because for some products it does. And you also might want to be asking about their minimum order quantities, because it is quite likely that you're going to have a budget that you can spend for this initial product, and if they want you to order 1,000, that might just not be feasible, and it might just rule this supplier out. So think about what they're going to need from you in order to give you a price, and what you're going to need from them to establish initially whether you could potentially work together. Because the first thing you're going to be doing once you start contacting suppliers is ruling them out. That's how it tends to work. You sort of rule them out until you end up with, hopefully, with a couple where you think, oh, okay, this could work. So week 5, I suggest, is a good time to research credible suppliers, and then perhaps towards the end of this week start to contact them. If you're doing really well, if you've managed to get your supplier communication done right at the beginning of week 4, maybe you move on to this a bit sooner. But let's say you've only got limited time. Week 5 is when you need to start your research. The first thing to think about, and I'm sure you've thought about this already, potentially, is where you'd ideally like to source your product from. By this I mean, are you looking at the UK or are you looking abroad? I do often get asked what's better, and I have to be honest, it really depends on what you're looking to sell, because you can't get everything made in the UK. I suggest that you weigh up the options and maybe even look into multiple scenarios. So if your product could be made in the UK, or it could be made abroad, or it can be made in a few different countries overseas, it might be worth looking at suppliers in different locations so that you compare the cost, you compare the quality and the lead times, obviously depending how much time you have and which, what's important to you. Because, for example, it might be really important that your product is made in the UK, or if not, as close to home as possible, or actually the most important thing to you might be that you can get it for the right cost, and those things don't always tie up. So think about what's important to you when you're making this decision, and remember that this also applies to any sort of components, packaging, ingredients, anything you need for your product. So even if you're making your product yourself, presumably you are going to need to source, whatever you need to make your product. And I think the same things apply. My key piece of advice here is to be really thorough. You can work with sourcing agents if you want to, but you don't have to. This is definitely something where I think you can save money and you can do it yourself. The one thing to know is that it does take time. Using your networks is a good way to get recommended suppliers and manufacturers. Nothing wrong with asking around. Some people will tell you who they work with, some won't. But then, no harm in asking. You also might find someone, knows somebody who works at a factory that does this or that or whatever. So do ask around. I also think there's nothing wrong with Google for finding and verifying potential suppliers, particularly if you're looking to source products out of China. If you're looking in China, I always recommend using Alibaba. It's a sourcing site. I've got episodes on this. I won't go into details now, but it's good. It gets better all the time, and it's a good way to find suppliers there. But if you're looking in the UK, there's nothing comparable, and Google is definitely the place to start. So what you want to do is end up with a shortlist, and actually it should be quite a long shortlist. I'm thinking you want for maybe initially 15 to 20 suppliers to contact. And once you've got this list, start contacting them. You're going to use the email template you already created. So hopefully it's just a case of finding an email address on the website, perhaps following it up with a phone call, depending where they are, and see what you get back. And one final thing, and this is just an aside, if you haven't already, this week might be a good time to think, okay, do I need someone to help me with design or branding or anything like that? But I'm well aware this is a big week, so this might be enough for you. So when we get into week 6, we're talking about tracking the responses. So I'm going to make an assumption that it took you a lot of time last week to research suppliers. It should take a lot of time. It shouldn't be something that you do in half an hour, because if you might find a really great supplier doing that, and if you have, that's amazing. But in my experience, it does take quite a long time to research suppliers that can do what you need them to do, you can verify they are who they say they are, and it can take a while, basically, especially because as I say, you really want to be contacting 15 to 20. You could probably find one very quickly, but I do think the more you contact, the better. One of the reasons being it gives you more choice. So even if you contact 10 and all 10, let's say, can do what you need, it gives you a bit more negotiating power, because you're going to get 10 prices to compare rather than 2 or 3, and you're going to know it gives you a better idea of what you should be paying, because you might not have any idea. I know that I certainly didn't in the early days, and I found that the more quotes I got, the more I got a sense of what the price could be. And you find that, say you get 10 quotes back, you'll find the most fit into a kind of ballpark, and then you'll get a few outliers that seem really high or really low, which to me is a red flag. If you're only contacting 2 and one's really high, one's really low, you might think, I'll go for that one because it's the lowest, without realising that actually that's way too low. And if you contacted a couple more, you'd realise that. So yeah, I think I went off on a bit of a tangent then, but yeah, contact lots of suppliers. And I would say that this week you should start to receive replies. And by the way, if you are really ahead of this, then well done, because this is the part that I think some people can struggle with, because it is a lot of work and it is very time consuming, and it's possibly something you've never done before, and I think it's a bit daunting as well. So let's say the replies are starting to come in. I'll also say, if they're not, don't panic. It can take a couple of days, because you never know how busy suppliers are and how many inquiries they're getting. So once you start getting replies in, I would suggest immediately disregarding anyone who can't meet your specification. This sounds really obvious, but it can be easy to get swayed. I think I've shared the story before that I wanted my baby products to be made of bamboo, but when I started sourcing, I got lots of people come back and say, I can't do bamboo, but I can do organic cotton. And I did find myself going, organic cotton doesn't sound too bad. But no, I'd said bamboo and I shouldn't have even thought about it. I should have said, you can't do bamboo? Okay, thank you for getting back to me, but no thank you. I also suggest disregarding any suppliers where communication's an issue. So whether that's a language barrier, or whether they're simply not being good at responding, you're waiting a couple of days every time to get a reply, or maybe you feel like your questions aren't being answered, because you're looking for a long-term relationship here. And if you feel like there might be communication difficulties from the start, that's not really a good way to begin. So in short, it's time to be ruthless. I am rubbish at being ruthless, but this is one time when I can do it, because it's really important. You might, towards the end of this week, want to think about ordering product samples, depending how conversations are going. I suggest ordering 2 or 3 samples from suppliers that you feel that you would be happy placing an order with, assuming the sample is up to standard. Because for me, the sample is the final thing. It's like, okay, I've got this group of suppliers, the communication's great, they can deliver the product, the price is okay, the minimum order quantity, everything's okay. Now I just need to see, the product for myself. And even if you're just looking for materials or components for your products, I still think this is important. If you're looking for your component, it might be actually you don't need to worry about samples. You can just place a small order and get the whatever it is you're looking for and see what it's like. But if this is a custom product, I would suggest a sample. Whether that means you need a custom sample or not, it really depends on what your product is, and every case will be different. I think only you can know that, if I'm honest. So you're going to order a couple of samples, and then I think what you need to do is compare them with each other. And I should also say that if you are ordering a custom sample and it's expensive, and you think actually there's no way I can afford 2 or 3 because it's a really high price, then I would just order one from the company that you feel most like, the one that you feel actually is the front runner. And I would then perhaps compare that sample to similar products at home if I had them, or see if I could borrow something from someone, or maybe I would order something similar online with the intention of returning it to compare them to, just so that I think it's very hard to look at something in isolation and go, is this what I wanted? But once you put it side by side, it's a bit easier. Whatever your product is, so if it's something that you can use, wear, whatever, then do the thing, wear it, wash it, play with it, whatever your product is intended to do that thing with the sample you receive, because you need to see how it stands up to day-to-day use, and you need to find any issues before a customer does. So if you get a lovely product sample, please don't just keep it in the box looking pristine. Actually use it and check that it does what you need it to do, because if it breaks the moment you handle it, you need to know that now, not when you've ordered 100 of them. So week 7 is about shipping and logistics, and I've I suggest you do this week, because it might be actually that narrowing down suppliers and ordering samples does take more than a week. So that can be carrying on as well. You might be having conversations with suppliers, but at the same time, you can be thinking about your shipping. So if you're sourcing your product abroad, in fact, wherever you're sourcing your products from, you need to figure out how you're going to get them from the supplier to you. There is a whole podcast episode on a blog post on shipping and importing products, I should say, from abroad, which is well worth a listen, as it is a minefield and there is a lot to get your head around. And if you only listen to one other episode, I do think this is a useful one. I do think that you need to think about this before you place your order, because the method you use to ship your products will impact on your final product cost and potentially your lead times as well. So, you have to weigh up, how quickly do I need this product to be here, and how much can I afford to pay to get it here. You need to have an idea of, are you going to pay import fees, and how much is that going to be? How are you going to clear customs? All of this stuff. And I'm not trying to put you off at all here. That's not my intention. But I do feel that you need to be thinking about this now, rather than when, your product's ready and then they say, okay, so how are you getting it over? And then you think, I haven't even thought about that. So do think about this now. This would also be a good time to think about logistics once your product's ready to sell, if you have the headspace to do that now. And I fully appreciate you might not, but at some point you need to also think about where you're going to store your product when it gets with you. And actually, if you're looking at your shipping this week, maybe you do need to decide that, because you might need to tell somebody where they're actually sending it. And the other thing to think about is how you will ship to customers. So will you send out products yourself initially? Will you use a third party? It might depend on the marketplace you use. For example, if you're going to sell products on Amazon, you might think, well, I'll send them to an Amazon warehouse. If you do think that, don't send all of your stock there. I have an episode on this as well. But you just need to just think this kind of thing through. And the other reason to do that is it will all impact on the finances, which is what we're going to talk about during week 8. This week, I want you to check and double check that you've included everything in your costing and you're comfortable with the profit margins. So you know what it's going to cost to make your product, you know what it's going to cost to get your product to you. Even if you haven't got like exact cost down to the penny, you've got a good idea by this point. I also think you could think about any future costs. So for example, let's say you're going to sell on Amazon and there's an account fee you have to pay. Find out what that is. Maybe you're going to set up a website, you haven't done that yet. Well, there'll be a hosting fee, you might have to pay for a domain. Find out as many of these costs as you can. Don't worry if you don't worry if you miss anything, because without being pessimistic, it's really easy to forget one thing. But let's not make it a big thing. The biggest cost is going to be the product cost, potentially the shipping cost as well, depending where your product's made, and the packaging. Make sure you have all of those costs. If you forget it's going to cost you, I don't know, £20 a year for a domain, don't panic about that now. Obviously, if you can include it, great. But if you don't panic. But think about all these costs, and are you going to need boxes for packing orders? Are you going to need, how much are you going to pay? Are you going to be sending orders to customers and it's going to cost you, I don't know how much it costs to post things, £2.99 an order, for example. Anything you're going to be spending, include in a spreadsheet so you can work it out. This might not take you a whole week, I should say, but in my experience, it's a task that can often take people a while to sit down and actually do, for many reasons, unless you've got a real head for numbers. So for some people, I know this is fun. For me, it's definitely not my favourite. This is a task I personally tend to put off for as long as possible, but it is really important. Please don't skip this step, because before you place your order, which we're going to do next week, you need to know where you are financially, you need to know where your money's going, and you need to have a good idea of whether you're going to get any of it back. So week 9 is decision time, placing your order. So hopefully now you found a supplier that you're happy with, you've agreed all of the terms, all the numbers add up, and it's time to place your order. Before doing that, I would just ensure you're really clear on everything. So for example, the product price, lead times, packaging, how the item will get from the supplier to you, everything that you need to be nailed down before confirming the order. And I also suggest having this in writing. And even if that's just an email where you email over and say, okay, so we've agreed X, Y, and Z, please, email me confirmation that this is your understanding too. Whatever it is, try and get it in writing because that'll make it easier in the very unlikely event that things go wrong further down the line. And so there you go, your product's ordered. I say there you go, I'm aware this has taken us 9 weeks and there's been a lot of work, but celebrate because it's exciting. Then week 10. So you might be thinking, okay, well, I've just placed the order, hard work's done. Well, actually, there is a lot to do while you wait for your product to arrive. 2 things I think you want to be thinking about is creating a marketing and launch plan, because you need to start thinking about, okay, you've got a product arriving, you need to start building excitement for it. Perhaps you're going to start taking pre-orders. There's a lot to do. You also need to think about how and where you're going to sell your product and start to get prepared. Maybe you know where you're going to sell your product, but what you need to start doing now is opening up accounts on online marketplaces. If you haven't yet set up your social media and your website, then you might want to do that now and just plan out all of your next steps. You will also need to be thinking about writing your product description, arranging product photography. There are lots of things you'll be wanting and needing to do. These are just some of the big ones. For the full list, you can download my product creation weekly planner. As I mentioned earlier, it's completely free, linked in the show notes. And I also gave you the web address at the top of the episode. And this is it really. This is 10 weeks. This is what's involved. And I'm aware that I've whizzed through this fairly quickly because otherwise this would be a very long episode. I can't possibly cover off everything here. I should say that you might feel that actually you can do this quicker than I've laid out. For example, you might be able to do multiple things per week, and that's absolutely fine. I think I said right at the top of this episode, this is all intended as a guide. You tackle it however suits you best. My intention was just to make this as manageable as possible if you're short on time, but you could work through the planner at your own pace, whether that's faster, slower, whatever suits you. Still think it's a really good resource. And I should also mention that if you wanted to work through this not alone and you wanted a bit more input from me and from other people, I do have a wait list for my group program where we're actually going to be going through this as a group, creating your product in 10 weeks in a very small group. It will be capped, to keep numbers small so I can spend, a decent amount of time with everybody. If you're interested in that program, I have a wait list. The address is checklist.vickyweinberg.com/waitlist. So it's checklist, all one word, .vickyweinberg.com/waitlist. And if you're interested, it's going to open up in a couple of weeks, and this is the first time I'm running it, so it's going to be at reduced cost. And if you go through the program now, starting in September, you will have your product ready by the end of the year, which I think is a fantastic position to be in. So if you want to create a product this year, you haven't yet done it, it is still possible. You can work with me, we can do it together. If you have any questions, you can always contact me. It's Vicki@vickyweinberg.com. Ask anything you like if you're not sure if it's for you, because of course I only want you to sign up if it's something that genuinely will benefit you. So I hope you found this episode useful. I feel like I've talked quite a lot in the last half an hour, and do remember to share the episode with anyone who might enjoy it, and always come back to me with any questions, and I will see you next week with another fantastic interview. Thank you so much for listening right to the end of this episode. Do remember that you can get the full back catalogue and lots of free resources on my website, vickyweinberg.com. Please do remember to rate and review this episode if you've enjoyed it, and also share it with a friend who you think might find it useful. Thank you again, and see you next week. If you've been inspired to start a podcast in 2024, I really recommend my podcast host, Captivate. Captivate were my top pick when I started podcasting 4 years ago because of how easy it was for a complete novice like me to get started. I've stuck with them for the last 4 years because Captivate is still really simple to use. They keep adding great new features like the ability to share ads like these, and they've just been really reliable. So when you're ready to start your own podcast, you can use the link in the show notes and get a free 7-day trial with Captivate.